The lamp quivers against the dark, sketching thin halos across timber and steel as winter breath tightens. Blood threads into the work table's scars, turning old sawdust into rust-colored pastes that clings to gloved fingertips. Snow presses the windows like a crowd, each flake an impatient witness demanding resolution. The cat lies bundled in wool, body shocked into stillness, one limb mangled beyond the mercy of splints or time. Air tastes of iodine, metal, and pine smoke drifting from a tired stove. Tools settle into a practiced order, quiet as a prayer stripped of ornament. From the porch, a golden retriever shifts her weight, nails tapping a patient code into frozen boards. Inside, the room shrinks until only pulse, light, and edge remain, a funnel drawing toward a single necessary act. When the blade enters the circle, the world holds its breath, and survival, for the first time tonight, finds a narrow lane. Before the lamp and instruments, there was only snow and a sound like cloth dragging across ice. Tracks staggered through the yard, uneven distances inked by pain and stubborn will. At their end, a small body shivered beneath rime, eyes steady, refusing the theater of panic. Iron clung to bone with a locksmith's arrogance, teeth slicked with frost and the raw shine of tissue. The wind combed the pines, dusting crystals that vanished before landing, as if mercy were always almost here. The retriever nosed the air, reading injury the way sailors read barometers. The steel carried stampings familiar from older winters, initials that once filled out forms and closed unsolved files. The yard fell quiet, listening to a decision assemble itself out of duty and grief. Rescue, when it finally moved, felt less like choice and more like being chosen by the moment's hard mathematics.
The phone's weight found an old groove in the palm, a muscle memory from roads patrolled before grief. Frost veined the glass, turning the window into a map of stalled rivers, frozen at every bend. Rings climbed the line, thin and distant, then steadied into a promise of arrival and action. The cat's breath fluttered, a paper-thin shutter over coals that refused to dim entirely. Outside, the retriever circled the porch, tail low, chest lifted toward the seam where warmth leaked. The storm tightened like a belt, wind rasping shingles and pushing drifts against the threshold. On the counter, a cracked mug collected lamplight, a small harbor for steadier hands. In kitchens like this, decisions accumulate beside radios and nails, waiting for the night that claims their usefulness. Somewhere along the wire, urgency found its landing place, and the house adjusted around the work to come. Headlights braided through falling snow, turning flakes into quick sparks that lived and died in a blink. Doors unlatched and cold shouldered past booths into the shed's narrow air, clean and impatient. Bags opened with practiced economy, instruments aligned in a brass bright row that tolerated no hesitation. The cat's stillness deepened into sleep shaped by exhaustion, body surrendering to hands it did not fear. The golden retriever settled at the threshold, eyes following motion with a guard's quiet arithmetic. Lamplight collected in glassware, warm and amber, while shadows leaned forward to watch without speaking. Outside, footprints crisped into fossils, each step proof that help takes shape and distance first. The shed learned a new heartbeat and held it, timber answering with soft ticks from hidden knots. Between inhale and exhale, the night split cleanly, separating what once was from what might still be saved.
Metal touched metal with the dry ring of precision, a rhythm that steadied hands and narrowed time. Antiseptic lifted into the lamp's warmth, the scent of clean intention meeting iron's colder memory. Breath pooled white at lips, then vanished, the room drafting itself around hovering focus. The cat's body shuddered once, then followed new currents toward lower waters, pulse settling into guarded shallows. Outside, wind ferried snow across the yard, grain against grain, like sandpaper shaping an unseen edge. The retriever raised her head, ears barely tilting, a quiet metronome for the room's invisible measures. The cut, when it came, felt like a door swinging open into a corridor without windows. Threads tightened, clamps released. The circle of light held steady as the world redrew its margins. When instruments stilled, silence returned, carrying a question only a heartbeat could answer with authority. The lamp's halo thinned to honey, settling over wool and bandage and the soft geography of rest. Air cleared into a calmer blend of soap, metal, and smoke, the sting gentled by heat's patient hands. The cat slept inside the fragile architecture of survival, chest lifting in uneven but convincing intervals. The retriever stepped closer, nose hovering a breath above fur, offering warmth without disturbance. Beyond the walls, dawn rehearsed pink along the fence rails, a slow rehearsal for color's return. Tools found their pouches, the room reclaiming its ordinary shapes with a tired kind of gratitude. Somewhere in the stove, resin snapped and surrendered, a small bright sound acknowledging the night's ledger. Not healing yet, not safe yet, but no longer falling. The balance shifted and held. In that holding, the house tasted relief, a flavor earned by blade, resolve, and mercy aligned.
Morning opened the desk like a file drawer, maps unfolding along familiar creases, margins annotated by earlier winters. Photographs leaned in crooked frames, younger faces squinting into cold, certain that enforcement would outrun cruelty. Report numbers whispered from manila edges, measurements of teeth and spring pressure written in obedient ink. Outside, frost telegraphed along wire fences, a silver script that refused to translate into comfort. The golden retriever stretched near the stove, tail settling into contented thumps that steadied the room's pulse. Memory walked the hall in heavy socks, pausing at thresholds where duty once changed clothes. The stamp on last night's steel echoed through the paperwork like a bell no one admitted hearing. Guilt arrived without ceremony, the slow hunter returning to a trail it never really left. The house absorbed it all, warm and unyielding, waiting for action to replace recollection. Daylight mapped the route beyond the yard, faint blood commas punctuating drifts where resolve stumbled onward. Under culverts, ice formed low ceilings, the air sharpened by runoff that mumbled old names. Thorn rows kept samples of fur, wind-lifted trophies stitched to winter sleeve. The trail wandered past the highway's numb shoulder, across clear cuts where stumps watched like veterans. A burn-scarred ridge held its black script, summer's fire now archived under thin, glittering crusts. The golden retriever paced half the distance, breath fogging steady, nose calibrating echoes of fear and grit. At a ditch bend, the pattern faltered, then recovered, a declaration that quitting never won a mile. When the sun finally cleared the far timber, it winked off iron, half-buried, mouth open, appetite unrepentant. Survival had written its testimony along these ditches, and the snow kept every page.
Inside the shed, quiet rearranged itself around a small sound. A thread tugged from deeper sleep. The cat's eyelid rose, green surfacing through glaze, attention catching on light pooled across boards. Bandage heaved unevenly, then settled, proof that rhythm, once found, prefers to keep company. Frost at the window loosened under sun, trickling into glittering seams that tracked gravity's patience. The golden retriever lifted her muzzle, exhaled warmth, and folded close like a blanket learning gentleness. The house matched her breathing, stove ticking agreements into timber, nails relaxing in old joists. Beyond the door, snow released a softened version of itself, tiny avalanches slipping from rails. Recovery declared no triumph, only presence, a low, steady pulse refusing negotiation. In that unremarkable miracle, morning took its place, not loud, not showy, but impossible to ignore. Light walked the floor in narrow planks, gold drifting over wool, wood grain, and the delicate rise of rest. The stove hummed a domestic basso, anchoring the room while the storm's tail unraveled outside. The cat lay tucked within warmth, a small sovereign learning the map of three-point balance. The golden retriever settled near the door, shoulders square, an old sentinel breathing welcome into the seam. On the wall, a calendar flipped without drama, its boxes empty, yet suddenly full of use. Every tool stood down, every bottle returned cap right, the night's theater closing to measured applause. In the shed's stillness, commitment thickened, ordinary as air, permanent as grain cut into plank. The house held it the way timber holds sun, storing heat for colder hours not yet named. A life had turned its corner. The day agreed to walk beside it.
Morning arrived without ceremony, its light soft but confident as it slipped across the windowsill. The air inside had changed, thinner now, washed of fear, yet still holding the residue of exhaustion. The cat rested near the stove, body wrapped in cotton and quiet defiance, fur glinting silver beneath slow heat. Across the room, the golden retriever stretched her limbs, tail brushing the floorboards like a broom for worry. Movement existed in fragments, spoon stirring broth, breath caught in observation, paw shifting beneath dream. Outside, frost retreated in small concessions, exposing the brown pulse of earth, ready for another burden. Within those four wooden walls, patience became occupation. Each heartbeat confirmed the invisible labor of healing. No one spoke, but presence replaced words, and for the first time in many winters, the rhythm inside matched the rhythm outside, a fragile truce between loss and the will to mend. By evening, progress faltered. Fever crept under the bandage like a rumor, soft at first, then insistent. The cat's breath shortened, paws twitching against unseen ache. The retriever stood close, nostrils flaring, reading sickness the way trees read lightning. In the corner, shadows from the lamp thinned and stretched, as if the house itself leaned closer. Footsteps paced, slow and deliberate, the sound of helplessness trying to disguise itself as control. The room's air thickened with antiseptic, winter air and fear, a trinity familiar to those who wait. Outside, sleet stitched itself into the eaves, sewing the night tighter. Hours dragged through the storm's restless stitching until finally the fever broke, leaving behind the smell of damp wool and spent worry. The retriever exhaled and lay beside the cot, content that silence now meant safety again. Every recovery tests faith. Tonight's faith passed, bruised, but still breathing.
Dawn returned cautiously, checking every corner before laying its first light on the table. The cat stirred, lifted his head, and balanced himself on three trembling legs. It wasn't grace, but it was motion, a new verb in the story of survival. His steps stitched a crooked path across the rug, small imprints forming the grammar of determination. Near the doorway, the golden retriever rose slowly, tail swaying in gentle rhythm, eyes tracing each movement as if counting blessings aloud. Outside, the wind softened its voice, carrying only the faint scrape of thawing branches. The house, once defined by waiting, now pulsed with subtle motion, kettle rising to boil, heartbeat aligning to footsteps. Hope arrived not in declarations, but in balance found and briefly held. Between man, cat, and dog, the room discovered a shared language, one built entirely on endurance, warmth, and breath that no longer stuttered.
Evenings grew longer in comfort rather than dread. The stove's hum became the heartbeat of the house, steady and forgiving. The cat now slept curled on a folded blanket, the silver of his fur catching every flicker of flame. The retriever claimed her spot near the hearth, golden coat glowing in amber light, tail occasionally thumping in half-dreams. Papers lay untouched on the table, old maps, old regrets, while outside, wind rehearsed its ghostly songs against the siding. The air smelled of pine smoke and slow acceptance. In these hours, grief eased its grip, replaced by something humbler and kinder. Time lost its sharpness. It moved like honey, thick and golden, stretching from dusk to dawn. In the soft shuffle of paws and the sigh of settling embers, the house learned what peace sounded like when it finally stopped asking to be earned.
News moves fastest where winters are longest. A story drifted through Cedar Flat of a wounded cat saved from steel and snow, of a man and his aging dog keeping vigil. It arrived by word of mouth, by truck stop gossip, by coffee steam rising in morning diners. One afternoon, footsteps crunched the drive, and with them came warmth in the form of company. The retriever's bark broke the monotony of quiet days. A pie on the counter, laughter at the door, questions that carried awe instead of pity. The house absorbed each with grateful walls. Beyond the glass, frost glittered like confetti from unseen celebration. The story had already begun to outgrow its origins. Mercy, once a private act under lamplight, was becoming communal currency. The cat, unaware of his own legend, stretched in the patch of sun that had always belonged to ordinary miracles. The knock came, hesitant, knuckles unsure of their invitation. On the porch stood a boy clutching a basket of food, cheeks bright from cold and courage. His boots shifted against the boards as the retriever approached, tail wagging approval. Inside, the cat lifted his head, eyes glinting in recognition of something gentle. The boy's awe filled the room like fresh air, pure, unfiltered belief that goodness still counted. Time held still long enough for wonder to take root. Outside, the sky broke open, shedding soft flakes that settled without urgency. The retriever lay between them, the silent witness to an exchange no words could frame. When the boy left, the door closed not on emptiness, but on echo. In that fading footprint, hope acquired a direction. It no longer floated aimlessly, but began to walk upright again, steady as new faith on winter ground.
The house began breathing again. Windows that had remained shut for years opened with the creak of forgiveness. Light, bold and unashamed, spilled across the floorboards, washing away the scent of isolation. The cat followed its warmth, tail flicking, head tilted toward new worlds beyond glass. The retriever lay in that sunlight, eyes half closed, her chest rising in slow agreement with this changing season. Dust motes turned into small planets, orbiting through still air. Each sound, the kettle's sigh, the wind's hush, the scratch of claws on wood, reassembled life's missing rhythm. Healing no longer whispered, it spoke clearly now, a confident cadence that filled the walls. The house, once mausoleum quiet, had learned laughter again, subtle but undeniable. Outside, snow began to melt along the edges, releasing the scent of earth that promised the next chapter would begin with open doors and light that stayed. The porch carried new footprints that didn't belong. Beneath the evening lamp, an envelope weighted by a small stone, edges curled from wind. Inside, a sketch,
Hand-drawn, deliberate, marked sites deep in the forest, loops and symbols known only to those who once hunted traps. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and damp iron. The retriever sniffed it, hackles barely rising before settling again. The cat, perched near the window, followed the movement with unblinking calm. Suspense entered quietly, threading itself between heartbeat and breath. Outside, pines swayed in approval or warning, no one could tell. The world, once confined to healing, widened suddenly toward danger. The same steel that had scarred flesh was still waiting in the woods. Mercy had opened a door. Consequence was now stepping through. The air thickened with purpose, as if even silence understood a reckoning had begun.
The forest waited under snow, like a secret holding its breath. Tracks of deer, fox, and coyote tangled along ridges, each step a possible lead. The man walked with care, boots sinking into half-frozen soil that sighed under pressure. The retriever followed close, her coat brushed white with frost, ears pricked for sounds that didn't belong. Along a fence line, something metallic glinted, old habits, reborn cruelty. He knelt, brushed away snow, and found what he expected: iron jaws, patient and hungry. The smell of rust mixed with pine sap and distant smoke from chimneys. Overhead, a crow screamed its disapproval, echo carrying through the bare branches. The cat stayed behind, safe and unaware, but the memory of his wound guided each careful motion. Every discovery felt like confession. When the trap was disarmed, the forest exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and warning. While steel met daylight in the forest, the house existed in its own calm orbit. The cat napped in sunlight, chest rising with measured ease. The retriever lay by the door, eyes half open, keeping time with the rhythm of distant footsteps only she could sense. Light rolled across the floor like tidewater, brushing walls that had learned patience. The air carried scents of pine and ash, warm from the stove but sharp at the edges. Domestic safety shadowed by wilderness waiting beyond the fence. Between stillness and motion, a thread tightened, unseen yet unbreakable, connecting the woods to this small haven. The retriever's ears twitched once, a signal that balance was shifting again. Somewhere out there, the past stirred under snow. Inside, healing held its fragile breath, unaware that every calm carries a waiting storm in its heart, ready to step through when the light softens.
The forest revealed its cruelty in fragments, thin wire glinting beneath thawing moss, a single paw print frozen in mid-stride, the echo of panic still trapped in the air. The second device waited half-buried, mouth open, jaws polished by cold intent. Snowmelt trickled through its teeth, whispering over iron like water learning grief. The retriever watched from the ridge, body tense, breath steady, tail low in measured vigilance. Each step toward the trap felt heavier, as though the ground itself tested conviction. The dismantling was slow, methodical, respectful of both danger and the ghost it represented. When the final spring released with a sigh, silence rushed in, filling the hollow like air returning to lungs. The forest's temperature lifted a single degree, imperceptible but real. Far away, the cat slept by the stove, unaware his suffering still echoed through frozen soil and gloved hands determined not to fail again. Memory returned with the cold. Years earlier, another patrol, another trap, a partner's shout swallowed by distance and wind. Metal had snapped then too, but that time the jaws claimed more than fur. They claimed trust. The forest kept the secret,
burying it under annual layers of forgiveness that never quite took. Now, each glint of steel pulled that voice back from snowdrifts and silence. The retriever paused, muzzle lifted, sensing a motion that carried no scent. In this kind of remembering, guilt becomes geography. It shapes the terrain, deepens valleys, and hardens the path. The man moved slower now, not from age, but from reverence for consequences measured in echoes. Behind him, the sun flared low in copper, staining the woods in nostalgia's cruel warmth. The forest had never forgotten the sound of metal closing. Neither, it seemed, had he.
By dusk, the story of traps spread across Cedar Flat like thaw through a frozen creek. Concern arrived not as panic, but as quiet gatherings. Thermoses shared, maps unrolled, questions whispered around kitchen tables. The house filled with visitors again, their boots leaving melted arcs on the floorboards. The golden retriever greeted each arrival with a patient wag, her calm disarming suspicion before it formed. In corners, murmurs debated whether one man should be the forest's keeper again. Outside, headlights swept snowbanks like brief comets, then disappeared into evening. The cat perched on the windowsill, eyes reflecting lamplight, gaze steady as if measuring the weight of human worry. In small towns, concern is its own weather, thick, slow-moving, impossible to escape. The meeting ended with nods and unfinished sentences, responsibility parceled out but never fully given away. The night waited, still undecided which direction belief would take. Darkness returned meaner than before, dragging wind that whistled like breath through clenched teeth. The retriever stirred first, head lifting, ears drawing tight to some distant sound. Outside, a shape moved between trees, too tall for animal, too deliberate for wind. The porch light trembled in its glass. Shadows swayed across the window, quick and uncertain. Inside, the clock ticked louder, each second a warning disguised as rhythm. Snow creaked under unseen weight, stopped, then continued closer. The retriever stood, silent, muscles rippling beneath fur, tail stiff with intent. For a long minute, both worlds, the warm interior and the frozen beyond, listened to each other breathe. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise receded, swallowed by pines and distance. The door held its frost like armor. The dog settled but didn't sleep again. Somewhere in the dark, patience had found new prey to follow.
Morning blurred into gray, neither promise nor apology. The woods beyond the fence looked harmless again, deceptive in their innocence. Inside, maps lay open beside untouched coffee, lines of terrain tangled like thoughts that refused to resolve. The retriever dozed by the hearth, yet one ear stayed awake, turning toward every soft creak. Memories unspooled quietly, looping through moments when law had felt like virtue instead of weight. Sometimes righteousness is just another trap, clean, well-made, waiting for belief to step inside. Outside, frost melted from branches and fell like small sighs onto snow. The cat stretched, tail tracing an elegant question mark across the floor. The day offered no answers, only distance to walk and work to do. Redemption, it seemed, demanded repetition, finding, facing, undoing. Some debts can only be repaid in footsteps retraced. The forest, patient witness, waited for proof. By afternoon, wind arrived restless, nosing through the chimney, scattering ashes across stone. Pressure dropped, invisible but absolute, and the sky descended until trees wore its color. The retriever paced the porch, uneasy, her instincts older than weather reports. Inside, light shifted to bronze, outlining every nail, every scar on timber. The cat crouched low, ears turning toward the first low rumble beneath the horizon. In moments like this, even safety feels temporary, built on borrowed time. The world contracted to smell and sound, ozone, pine resin, the faint hum of static along window glass. Each heartbeat synchronized with thunder's rehearsal.
The storm, when it finally came, didn't fall from the sky. It rose from roots and soil. The first strike lit the ridge like memory itself, brilliant, fleeting, unavoidable. Both house and forest braced for what followed.
The storm passed but left the air raw and metallic. The man returned to the woods, steps muffled in soaked moss, flashlight cutting thin cones through mist. The retriever moved ahead, her fur darkened, paws whispering over leaf litter that steamed under sudden warmth. Rain had rearranged everything, tracks blurred, scents washed into rivulets, time itself diluted. Yet persistence learns new senses. Near the creek, a flash of iron betrayed the trap's location. Beside it, cigarette ash, fresh, gray, deliberate. The air held the residue of someone's breath minutes gone. Evidence doesn't always confess aloud, it just waits to be seen by eyes that remember guilt's architecture. The retriever froze, muzzle pointed into shadows thick as fabric. Somewhere ahead, branches cracked softly, too rhythmic for wind. The flashlight stilled. In the space between two heartbeats, awareness became target. The forest listened, then went utterly still. Sunlight returned the next day, bright and misleading, glinting on puddles that pretended to be peace. The town gathered near the porch for coffee, talk, and nervous laughter. The retriever wove between boots and hands, receiving the gratitude meant for someone braver. The cat watched from the window, tail swaying to an invisible rhythm, content yet alert. Even serenity carries static. It hums under pleasantries, waiting to strike a wrong chord. People spoke of miracles, of how faith had circled back after years of silence. None mentioned the traps or the footprints or the eyes that still scanned tree lines. The retriever's gaze flicked toward the woods as if catching a reflection that didn't belong. Joy feels lighter when danger pretends to sleep nearby. By sunset, chairs folded, cups stacked, and the yard exhaled its borrowed calm. The quiet afterward felt rehearsed, not real.
The next note arrived at dusk, dropped without footsteps, pinned by a single nail to the porch beam. Its message was brief, 5 words written in a hand that didn't tremble. Stop before you're next. The paper smelled of smoke and damp cedar, edges curled from haste. The retriever growled low, throat vibrating against wood. Inside, the cat's ears flattened, eyes dilating with ancestral understanding. The house held its breath. Beyond the yard, the forest appeared ordinary, every shadow precisely where it belonged. Yet something had shifted in its posture. It no longer watched, it waited. Wind threaded through branches, translating threat into motion. Somewhere a nail loosened, tapping rhythm against siding, impatient. The paper fluttered once, a heartbeat of warning, then stilled. Dusk thickened into something tangible. Fear, when quiet enough, becomes architecture. It builds itself into walls and refuses to leave. Night claimed the ridges early, draping the valley in violet and ember. Inside, the lamp burned steady, its circle of light small but defiant. The cat slept near the window, breath slow, pulse even. The retriever lay beside him, a golden line of calm across shadow. On the table, maps sprawled like open wounds, roots marked in red where traps still waited unseen. Decision gathered slowly, not in words, but in the tightening of shoulders, in the measured packing of tools and rope. Redemption had crossed from memory into mission. Outside, frost began its quiet descent, sealing everything in temporary purity. The retriever's eyes followed every motion, understanding loyalty's deeper cost. Far out in the timber, a lone owl called once, low, final, and accepting. The reply came in silence, the kind that means yes. The war against the steel would start at first light.
The first scent of smoke arrived thin and deceptive, braided into pine air so lightly it could have been memory. The sky wore a haze that didn't belong to weather, an amber tint that flattened the sun into a dull coin. Wind, restless and wrong, carried the low crackle of distant combustion, the forest rehearsing disaster. The retriever's hackles rose, tail stiff. Instinct never trusts orange light. The cat shifted near the door, eyes catching flame before the world did. In the valley, whispers passed faster than cell towers. Controlled burn gone loose, ridgeline bleeding sparks into dry timber. The air tasted of copper and ash. Even the snowmelt hissed at contact. Fire each distance the way guilt eats silence. By evening, the horizon pulsed like a wound reopening. Inside the shed, preparation replaced denial. Buckets, blankets, rope. The quiet choreography of those who have seen loss coming and stayed anyway. Smoke thickened by dawn, fog's cruel imitation. The forest spoke in muffled roars, every tree translating heat into plea. Along the trail, a fox cried, a sound sharper than fire itself. The man found it caught, hind legs snared in new steel, the scent of burned resin rising around the trap. Flamelight danced across the brush, breathing closer with each gust. Gloves slipped once, then steadied. The release came with a metallic gasp. The fox limped away, vanishing into smoke like a half-forgiven sin. The retriever barked once, sharp, summoning retreat. Heat folded around them as embers leapt across the creek in red arcs. When they reached open ground, lungs dragged air thick as syrup. Fire had rewritten the map, turning familiar paths to ghost corridors. Behind them, trees collapsed with the sound of confession, and mercy, again, proved it could blister as well as heal.
The wind reversed without warning, dragging flame back toward the house as if hunting unfinished business. Sparks landed in drifts, melting them into black hollows that smoked like open mouths. The cat was still inside, hidden beneath the lull of routine, unaware of the speed of ruin. Windows reflected orange, then fractured inward with a soft implosion. The retriever bolted first, driven by scent older than thought, paws striking ash-laced snow. The man followed through heat and disbelief, shouting words no air could carry. Inside, visibility vanished. The world became noise, light, and instinct. From beneath the table, a faint shape moved, fur singed but alive, eyes wide, unbroken. He wrapped it in a coat that steamed on contact, turned toward the fading outline of escape. Behind him, the ceiling groaned like a wounded animal. When they stumbled into daylight, breath was victory enough. Flames raced along the porch beams, turning years of quiet mornings into fuel. The retriever circled back, teeth gripping fabric, guiding toward the gap where daylight thinned the smoke. Every inhalation sliced the throat, but motion outpaced pain. Air whooshed as the structure surrendered to its hunger, boards collapsing inward with exhausted grace. Outside, snow melted into rivulets that steamed across the yard. A slow applause for survival. The cat's heartbeat thumped erratically beneath scorched fabric. The retriever pressed close, muzzle brushing as if counting beats. The man fell to his knees, lungs dragging fire and gratitude alike. Behind him, the house collapsed into a single exhale of sparks, rising to join the gray sky that birthed them. Sometimes salvation leaves nothing standing but proof of effort. The survivors, man, dog, and cat, sat amid ruin, breathing together, the only rhythm the world still recognized.
By morning, the air had cooled to metallic calm, the kind that arrives after judgment. Smoke hovered low, unwilling to disperse, draping the valley in ghost cloth. Ash settled on everything, blurring edges, erasing contrast. The yard was a mosaic of half-formed memories, teacup shards, twisted hinges, nails pointing nowhere. The retriever moved through it softly, her golden coat now gray with soot, tail lowered yet unbroken. The cat slept under a wool wrap, flank rising in slow, even tides. Each breath sounded like a question answered privately. In loss this total,
Gratitude becomes sacred practice. The forest beyond smoldered but alive, blackened trunks whispering endurance to one another. The world had taken, and yet it had not finished them. Survival, again, refused surrender. Above the ruins, daylight returned, pale but honest, as if reminding them that ruin, too, is just another shape of continuation. Amid the debris, twisted metal glimmered beneath a sheet of melted snow. A trap's remains, blackened but legible. Its branding mark survived, stamped deep, initials matching every unsolved report from years past. The man brushed away ash with fingertips trembling not from exhaustion, but from recognition. The retriever stood beside him, quiet, watching revelations solidify. Around them, smoke lifted like veils, exposing the bare bones of truth. Some fires cleanse more than they consume. They expose what hides in timber hearts and human ones alike. He pocketed the fragment, its edges sharp enough to cut skin, but not resolve. Behind him, the cat stirred, eyes narrowing at sense of iron and soot, instincts nodding unease into certainty. The evidence weighed less than guilt, but more than memory. Proof had survived where home had not, a trade the forest demanded for every sin left buried.
By nightfall, word had reached every porch light in Cedar Flat. The trapper was real, and his mark now burned into metal and conscience alike. Plans unfolded across maps spread under lantern glow. Grid lines, creek bends, vantage ridges. Volunteers whispered strategies while the retriever lay near the door, a sentinel carved in gold and patience. The cat rested atop a folded blanket, eyes glinting like flint under flame. The town's unity carried tremor beneath resolve. Fear always finds room, even in courage. Radios hissed static prayers, coordinates spoken as if they could summon absolution. Outside, frost formed again, sealing ash into soil, pressing the day's revelations beneath new silence. The man loaded rope, flashlight, and memory into his pack. Guilt may have started this mission, but justice had taken the reins. Dawn would decide whether closure came gently or demanded another cut. The forest waited under half-moonlight, silver on ash, frost gleaming like unfinished truth. From the ridge came the soft percussion of boots and frozen dirt, steady, deliberate, belonging to someone unafraid of darkness. The retriever's growl began low, rising through her chest like distant thunder. Shadows rearranged until one shape refused to dissolve. A man stepped forward, outline broken by branches, breath ghosting in steady rhythm. He carried nothing visible but confidence, and that was weapon enough. Between them stretched a silence built from years of unsaid names and unpunished acts. The flashlight clicked on, slicing night into fact and fear. Faces met across 20 feet of consequence. Somewhere behind, the cat watched from the cabin's ruins, eyes twin beacons. The first movement came not from rage, but inevitability. Justice finally finding its footing on cold ground. The forest, impartial judge, leaned in to witness.
In confrontation's breathless gap, the forest itself seemed to hesitate. The trapper shifted, metal gleam flashing at his side, threat or reflex impossible to tell. From the ruins behind, a streak of silver gray cut through shadow. The cat moved with fluid precision, 3 legs against fate's arithmetic, a blur of defiance and timing. The retriever lunged, intercepting direction, guiding chaos away from blood. The flashlight beam fractured, scattering white shards across trees. The gun's report came too late, bark exploding inches wide of its mark. Silence slammed back harder than sound. The trapper stumbled, disbelief breaking his composure. In that suspended second, courage wore fur and scars. The cat landed beside the retriever, stance unshaken, eyes narrowed to emerald slits of resolve. Every survivor carries its own weapon. His had always been the refusal to die where cruelty expected compliance. Rain began before dawn, fat drops smothering smoke, turning ash to paste. The forest exhaled, steam rising from its wounds. Footsteps thrashed, shouts layered over thunder, and within minutes, pursuit became capture. The trapper lay face down, wrists bound, the mark on his tools exposed under beamlight. Justice never shouts. It breathes, slow, satisfied, like rain finding soil again. The retriever stood guard, soaked and gleaming, tail sweeping arcs through mud. The cat perched on a fallen beam, watching with detached certainty, as if recognizing the closing of a circle. Around them, deputies gathered evidence, murmured into radios, and exhaled relief that trembled at its edges. When daylight broke through thinning clouds, the valley appeared rinsed clean, but humbled. Mercy and vengeance shared the same horizon line now, gray, soft, and necessary. For the first time in years, the forest slept, without fear humming beneath its roots.
Rain tapered into mist, leaving the valley rinsed and raw. Charcoal steam rose from blackened roots, each wisp a quiet obituary for what had burned and what survived. The air held no scent of danger now, only the wet, metallic calm that follows justice's long exhale. The retriever walked the yard slowly, paws pressing prints and ash and new mud, her tail sweeping a rhythm that promised endurance. Near the steps, the cat stretched beneath a wool blanket, fur slicked into silver waves. From the ruins, a kettle's handle gleamed, the last small artifact of comfort. Morning sunlight slanted through lingering haze, not bright yet, but sincere. The forest beyond whispered reconciliation in dripping branches. In that fragile equilibrium, loss and peace stood side by side, both welcome guests. The world had been reduced, yes, but in its reduction, truth had finally found a place to sit and breathe. By the second day, the first volunteers arrived, carrying lumber, nails, and something heavier than tools, gratitude disguised as work. They spoke softly, reverent around the ground that had nearly devoured its own history. The retriever moved among them like a host, her golden coat bright against the char, accepting every pat as permission to continue. The cat perched near a beam, watching sawdust float in sunshafts, unbothered by hammer's rhythm. Laughter began to echo through the clearing, fragile at first, then confident. The new walls rose where smoke had once thickened. The scent of pine replaced that of burnt memory. Each plank lifted by steady hands became a word in a language older than despair. The town was rebuilding more than wood. They were constructing proof that ruin doesn't end stories, it edits them. Every nail driven was a vow to keep the light inside permanent.
The sign came last, carved by hands that understood reverence better than speed. Letters painted white on aged oak read, "Homewood Trail, a place to begin again." The phrase looked simple, but carried the entire town's heartbeat beneath its paint. Children gathered around as the sign was lifted, their voices scattering across the ridge like finches startled into flight. The retriever lay nearby, chin resting on her paws, eyes following every motion with gentle approval. The cat prowled beneath the scaffolding, tail flicking in time with hammer strikes. Beyond the fence, forest light shifted between cloud breaks, a pulse matching the cadence of work. The moment the sign settled into earth, a gust moved through the pines, scattering needles across the lettering as if to bless it. Renewal didn't shout, it whispered, found in the simple act of giving broken places new names to live by. Days unfolded into repetition, footsteps, nails, laughter, the rough music of rebuilding. The cat explored cautiously, 3 legs tracing smooth arcs across unfinished floors. The retriever followed the younger workers, tail sweeping sawdust into lazy clouds. Beneath the new roof, warmth began its slow return,
creeping through walls like a rumor of spring. Each evening, smoke rose from a new chimney, clean and blue, the smell of cedar overtaking the scent of loss. In corners, fresh blankets appeared, bowls refilled, kindness made practical. The forest outside hummed with ordinary life, birds returning, streams gurgling, the soft shuffle of deer unafraid again. Healing is rarely dramatic. It's measured in the small, repetitive acts that convince the heart safety exists. Under amber lamplight, the cat curled near the retriever's flank, the contrast of silver and gold glowing like proof that coexistence can learn endurance from pain.
Evening brought familiar headlights down the new gravel path. The veterinarian returned, boots carrying the authority of compassion. She stood at the edge of the rebuilt porch, gaze sweeping over what now stood in place of ruin. Inside, the cat blinked from his perch, and the retriever rose, stretching toward her with a wag that spoke of recognition and gratitude. The air smelled of cut pine and fresh paint, sense of rebirth. Nora paused, breath forming small clouds, eyes soft yet knowing. Some wounds mend in skin, others mend in silence shared among those who once faced darkness together. She lingered there, hands in her coat pockets, listening to the rhythm of life continuing. Hammer, paw step, heartbeat. When she finally turned toward her truck, the forest exhaled behind her, as if agreeing certain creatures arrive not to save, but to remind that faith can survive surgery. News traveled further this time, carried by photographs, headlines, and the quiet marvel of strangers. The story of a wounded cat, a loyal dog, and a small town rebuilt from ashes began filling airwaves and screens. Reporters called it miraculous, though miracles rarely smell of smoke and splinters. Cars arrived from neighboring counties. Cameras flashed against the wooden sign as if truth required proof. The retriever tolerated the crowd's affection, leaning into every hand that offered warmth. The cat sat regal on the porch rail, blinking slow approval. Behind the lens glare, the forest waited, unchanged and unimpressed by fame. The community didn't seek glory, it sought continuation. Every retelling rewove grief into grace, stitching faith tighter into their shared skin. When night came, the valley dimmed its lights as though weary of attention, content to let quiet reclaim its rightful stage. Spring arrived not with flowers, but with sound. The steady drip of thaw, the sigh of ice surrendering to streams. The forest exhaled its burden, ground darkening with new roots. At Homewood Trail, grass edged through soot, finding sunlight in defiance of memory. The retriever rolled on the damp earth, tail flicking bits of green into the air, while the cat watched from the porch rail, eyes narrowing at the brightness. The smell of sap and wet soil replaced ash, and the air tasted alive again. Every morning brought different light, no longer fragile, now confident. Inside, walls breathed warmth, photos framed in fresh varnish reflecting futures instead of ghosts. The seasons, once measured only by survival, began measuring joy again. In each small bloom, the valley whispered forgiveness. Life, it seemed, had found a second draft, and this one refused to end in smoke. By early summer, the road to Cedar Flat hummed with arrival. Families, travelers, and those simply searching for something unbroken came bearing stories instead of donations. A widow carried a photograph of her long-lost pet. A veteran laid down a dog tag at the fence post, muttering gratitude to no one in particular. Children brought flowers picked from the roadside, their laughter fluttering like new wings. The retriever moved among them with practiced gentleness, guiding without command. The cat accepted the adoration of visitors with quiet dignity, his scar a crown rather than a flaw. The air filled with mixed sounds, hammers still at work, birds calling, human voices rediscovering decency. What began as one act of mercy had become an ecosystem of kindness.
Under the broad sky, the sanctuary lived up to its name, proof that faith doesn't need preaching, only continuity.
The rhythm of routine returned. Coffee steaming on the porch, paws padding across polished wood, distant chatter from the trail below. Grief, once an occupying force, now visited only as memory, softer each time. A photograph on the wall, two faces in youth, watched without accusation. The retriever rested nearby, eyes half closed, the picture of quiet guardianship. The cat leapt to the window ledge, tail flicking toward sunlight with unconcerned grace. The man no longer measured days by loneliness. He measured them by purpose, feeding, mending, welcoming. The forest beyond no longer felt haunted. It sounded alive again. Acceptance arrived not as revelation, but as routine finally free of dread. Some salvations come loud. Others wear slippers and pour a second cup. When dusk folded into the valley, peace didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt earned. Late afternoon light pooled like honey, stretching long shadows across the new porch. Neighbors gathered, children perched on railings, laughter carried by the mild wind. A camera clicked softly, each frame stitching permanence into the day's gentle edges. The retriever sat upright, muzzle silvered, eyes bright with quiet command. Beside her, the cat reclined, fur gleaming in sunbeam gold. Around them, faces leaned inward, a circle built on shared survival. Beyond the frame, the forest stood tall and neutral, indifferent, yet approving. The shutter's final sound marked completion more than documentation. Photographs can't hold warmth, but they can suggest it, and this one did, perfectly. As the crowd dispersed, light faded into the calm blue of early evening. Inside the house, stillness returned, not empty, but full. In every corner, a small pulse of memory remained, proof that faith, once found, tends to stay.
Winter returned with less cruelty this time. Snow soft, wind tired, the valley aged into calm familiarity. Months had folded quietly over Homewood Trail, smoothing its edges into something almost ordinary. The cat had grown slower, movements deliberate and careful. He no longer climbed the windowsill but watched from the hearth instead. The retriever's muzzle had gone fully white, her loyalty aging into gentleness. Around them, the sanctuary thrived. New rescues settled, laughter replaced hammers, and hope became daily background noise. Frost gathered on window corners like lace, and the air smelled faintly of hay, cedar, and peace earned through effort. The world outside might still stumble toward cruelty, but inside these fences, mercy had permanence. Seasons no longer announced themselves in drama. They simply arrived, found the place welcoming, and decided to stay a while, content to be ordinary blessings disguised as quiet days. The cat began sleeping longer, curling deeper into the wool blanket that carried years of warmth. Breathing came shallow now, each inhale a whisper, counted by the retriever lying close. Around them, the house carried a hush born of intuition, the kind that doesn't need words to confirm what it already knows. The forest beyond remained still, snow falling straight without wind, respectful in its descent. Inside, light softened to candle gold, touching fur, wood grain, and memory. The retriever nudged gently once, then settled again, guarding without demand. Time moved like water freezing, slow, inevitable, impossibly graceful. The cat's eyes opened occasionally, green fading into misted gray, still curious, but less tethered. The air thickened with nostalgia and something gentler than sorrow. This wasn't tragedy approaching, it was completion assembling itself, quiet, deliberate, inevitable as the turning of a final page.
Dawn arrived fragile and pure, pale light creeping along the edge of the blanket where the cat lay still. The room was warm, the stove humming a low song of continuity. Steam curled from a mug left untouched, drifting upward like incense for a private ceremony. Outside, frost painted the porch in silver veins, the pattern resembling rivers flowing backward. The retriever sat beside the hearth, tail tucked, eyes locked on the slow rhythm of rise and fall beneath wool. Each breath was shallower than the last, but steady, a final mercy. Somewhere outside, a woodpecker tapped a slow farewell into the day. There was no fear in the room, only gratitude written in small movements, a paw flexing once, a tail's faint stir, the house exhaling in rhythm. Love, distilled into presence, asked for nothing more than witness. The light grew softer, then paused, waiting. The door opened mid-morning to the familiar crunch of boots on snow. The veterinarian stepped inside quietly, coat dusted white, face softened by recognition and restraint. She didn't ask questions, she already understood. The retriever greeted her with slow steps, pressing against her leg once before sitting again. The air smelled of pine ash and thyme. Nora knelt beside the blanket, hand hovering above fur still warm, pulse barely perceptible beneath her fingertips. Compassion made no noise. It lived in still gestures, in respect for the space between beats. She looked around the room, the rebuilt walls, the mended frames, the quiet order, and saw not death preparing, but peace fulfilling its final duty. Outside, snow resumed gently, flakes drifting without direction. She left with slow certainty, closing the door like a prayer finished. Inside, the warmth continued, carrying the weight of her silence like benediction.
Afternoon light thinned into a golden thread, weaving across the floorboards toward the open door. The cat stirred, eyes flicking toward brightness as if answering an old invitation. The retriever stood instantly, following his gaze. Step by step, the fragile form moved across the rug, balance uncertain but resolve steady. Each pause stretched long enough for air to applaud quietly. Together they crossed the porch, where sunlight trembled on melting frost. Outside, the field gleamed under pale sky, the world newly washed. The retriever kept close, her body curved protectively around the smaller gate. Snow whispered beneath their steps, marking time in gentle indentations. They reached the edge of the yard where pine shadows stretched like open arms. In that quiet expanse, neither hurry nor hesitation existed, only companionship tracing the narrow border between presence and memory. The forest waited, patient, kind, ready to receive. Beneath the oldest pine, the air felt different, softer, scented with resin and old rain caught in bark. The cat stopped, gazing toward the horizon where sunlight poured in liquid gold across the ridge. The retriever sat beside him, silent, head bowed as if acknowledging command unspoken. Wind passed through the branches in slow procession, scattering needles that glittered as they fell. The cat lowered himself onto the cool earth, curling into the shape he had chosen for sleep. Breathing slowed, steadied, then faded into stillness too perfect to interrupt. Time hesitated, reluctant to continue. The retriever leaned closer, nose brushing fur, holding position long after the heartbeat beneath her touch ceased. When she finally lifted her head, the forest's sound returned, muted, reverent. Above them, light shifted, brighter now, as if the sky itself had paused to bless what faith had accomplished before departing quietly.
Evening brought a colorless calm. Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, veiling the scene in serenity. The ground gave easily, soil soft beneath frost's thin armor. Hands worked gently, shaping a hollow deep enough for remembrance, not sorrow. The cat lay wrapped in the old wool blanket, its fibers holding years of warmth and whispered thanks. Beside the mound, the retriever waited, tail still, breath visible in faint clouds. A carved wooden marker leaned against a stone. Milo, the one who taught us faith. No elegy was spoken. The forest handled that in its own vocabulary. Creak, sigh, hush. When the last earth fell, wind rose and turned once around the pine, sealing the promise. Snow soon covered everything, but memory does not freeze. It glows, subtle as embers under ash, patient for the next spark of kindness to uncover it. Days later, footsteps returned. Neighbors, strangers, travelers drawn by rumor and reverence. They came bearing flowers, candles, small tokens of shared belief. A child left a hand-drawn picture of a gray cat with wings. A veteran placed a folded letter in the snow, words sealed under trembling hands. The retriever greeted each visitor with measured calm, guiding them to the grave's edge, where silence spoke clearly. The sanctuary became a pilgrimage site, not for worship, but for renewal. Every story left behind joined the wind's collection, proof that compassion replicates effortlessly once given direction. When twilight came, the valley shimmered with hundreds of small lights. Together, they formed constellations on the ground, mirroring stars above, a dialogue between heaven and earth, conducted entirely through remembrance. Faith, once a whisper inside one shed, had become a chorus carried by every softened heart.
The pine stood unchanged, sentinel to seasons turning. Beneath it, snow thinned, revealing moss where warmth lingered longer. The retriever often returned alone, lying near the mound, eyes half closed, listening. Sometimes she heard nothing but her own steady breath. Other times, a faint sound rose through air, a purr, or maybe just the hum of wind rehearsing kindness. The house remained bright, its walls echoing laughter and life, yet that small corner of the yard held gravity, a place where silence kept memory intact. Visitors still came, fewer now, their offerings simpler, flowers, crumbs of thought, gestures unrecorded. The retriever stayed until evening, then walked home along the familiar path, tail brushing frost, step measured. Behind her, the pine shivered once, shedding a single needle that landed softly on untouched snow. Memory had weight, yes, but also wings. Both had learned how to coexist. Night stretched across Cedar Flat in silver quiet. The house glowed faintly, its windows golden squares stitched into the dark. Inside, a notebook lay open, last page half filled with looping script. The words read like closure disguised as gratitude. Love doesn't die. It changes shape so it can guide those still wandering. The pen rested beside it, its ink finally spent. Outside, the retriever slept near the door, dreams flickering beneath her eyelids like embers remembering flame. Above the ridge, a single meteor crossed the sky, bright, brief, indifferent, yet perfectly timed. Somewhere between the stars and the pines, a presence lingered, neither gone nor ghost, simply transformed into continuity. The wind carried it over rooftops, through fields, across fences, whispering the same refrain to all who listened closely enough. Faith is not found, it is kept, one heartbeat at a time.